You don't belong here. Should have stayed where it was warm. Like little sparrow.
When I started this channel, I made it my mission statement to share cool shit happening in the indie horror space, and Hollowbody was at the forefront of my mind. Taking inspiration from classic Silent Hill right down to its 6th generation veneer, Hollowbody is an homage to old-school survival horror with a tech noir twist. The game is elevated by strong art design, sobering sound work, and a dystopic story where corporate encroachment leads to living nightmares. Though it boggles the mind, Hollowbody is a solo effort. Its creator, Headware Games, is essentially one person, Nathan Hamley, who wrote, designed, programmed, and scored this entire game from T to B. The game is on the shorter side, probably no more than 5 hours even for a first play, but given how well articulated its world mechanics are, featuring item scrounging, puzzles, combat, I would have guessed it was made by at least a small team. I have some quibbles, and we'll get to them, but it can't be overstated how impressive of an undertaking this is for a single person. I won't bury the lead. If you're a horror fan with an ounce of tolerance for retro survival horror, I think it's a must-have. The game is set 60 years after the city of Barnston collapsed. Bioterrorist attacks have rendered the British Isles uninhabitable, so they were walled up and locked down. The survivors fled, eventually taking refuge in a floating megacity called Aonis. That's how the story goes anyway. But Sasha wasn't satisfied with the story. She wanted the truth. So she sets off with a group of like-minded hazmat-suited individuals looking for answers. But when she goes missing for 12 days, it's your turn to look for answers. You play as Mika Holloway, a black market shipper who just wants her partner back and is willing to brave hell to find her, which is a great mentality considering what's about to happen. By chance, you're given a small window of time to fly over the abandoned city, a window that shuts very suddenly. You're stranded in this residential ruin now. You need to find Sasha, and you need to find a way out. Welcome to the Exclusion Zone. From here, Mika navigates the bombed-out ruin of a suburb. The game oscillates between wide-open areas and cramped interiors. It won't come as a surprise to learn that the latter are creepier, including the first big section you enter, the apartment block. The dark, disquieting hallways call to mind the Blue Creek apartments, otherwise known as a pang in my stomach whenever I think about Silent Hill 2. Just like in that game, you can barely see anything that's not right in front of you. The atmosphere is so heavy, it makes you feel like you're in danger when all you're doing is searching an empty room. You start to prefer locked doors to open ones because it frees you from the anxiety of the unknown. I mean this as a compliment, but the sound design is a menace. Every step, every bang, every little electrical buzz cuts through the air with ill intent. The music tends to find the exact note needed to make it seem like there's something hiding in the shadows. Moldy roots grow every which way, like you're looking at the building's decayed nervous system. You come across old tech, chunky devices that are a far cry from the technology Mika has on her. This contrast emphasizes how Barnston is trapped in the past, giving you the sense that you're exploring a walkable death mask of a community left to rot. You find the bodies of residents. Some died of sickness, some died of starvation, and others, well, somehow, these apartments became 600 square foot coffins. Unfortunately for you, you get to find out why. Whatever sickness hit these people changed some of them, and they're still walking these halls as wailing husks of bone and muscle. And of course they attack on sight. Thankfully, shippers carry insurance. Ranged weapons are effective, literally letting you blast enemies apart while keeping you at a safe distance, but ammo can be scarce in the early game. Your arsenal begins with a sure-shot pistol and grows to include a blocky shotgun and a bow, both of which deal a big amount of damage but are hard to replenish. If you're willing to backtrack the entire length of the game with the right set of items, you'll get to live out your Lieutenant Ripley dreams with a turnkey flamethrower. If you played, you won't be surprised to find that gunplay is complemented by melee. Slapping enemies with a stick, or a makeshift axe, or a goddamn guitar will save you precious rounds as long as you're willing to put yourself in whacking distance. The melee is okay. It could certainly be worse. The lock-on works great with firearms, usually, but it hampers your movement during melee. It was easier for me to forego lock-on and take these running swipes at enemies and follow up with a hefty stomp. To be honest, I was never quite strapped for ammo during my normal playthrough, so my engagement with melee was more about curiosity than necessity. You give me a guitar as a weapon, I'm gonna want to swing it like the six-string samurai. Does anyone remember the six? Melee is a rudimentary means to an end, just like it was in older Silent Hill titles. We'll have to wait for a AAA remake of Hollowbody before Mika can do shit like... At the end of the day, your best weapon is avoidance. Mika moves faster than your average dead-wifed horror protag, so you can easily thread between hollows, especially in the big outdoor sections they like to populate. As I've noted in other indie horror games, you won't be dealing with a large roster of enemies. There's normal-size hollows, abnormally-sized hollows, and some dogs. Hollows are classic survival horror fodder. They're slow, but they hit hard if they reach you, and they're often placed right in your way. I think the game could really use something to escalate enemy encounters, like how hunters added a dimension of challenge to the original Resident Evil, because they were fast, leapt like demons, and could separate your head from your shoulder pads in an instant. I get it though. It's probably pretty hard to create a diverse set of enemies on top of designing the rest of the fucking game from end to end. These creepy little mummies work. We'll just have to jot it down as an opportunity for the sequel. Gangly fiends aren't the only obstacles Mika will face. In true genre fashion, you'll contend with locked doors and environmental puzzles as much as you fight ghoulies. There's a focus on combining key items that feels very Silent Hill, and it's cool how some items actually have multiple uses throughout the game, hinting that there's more to discover than you think. There's no inventory restriction, so you can pick up anything and everything. The puzzles you tackle fit the setting really nicely. You're not hunting for decorative medallions to move statues. There's a practicality to them. You're jamming chopsticks in the circuit breakers and starting garbage fires to set off sprinklers. You'll even find a fun process of elimination puzzle that randomizes every time you get to it. There's a healthy balance between exploration, puzzle solving, and combat in Hollowbody that keeps the pace from grinding to a halt. You'll have to backtrack a fair amount, but the environment is so well realized, I didn't mind soaking in the atmosphere. Traversing the ruined streets in the dark, rain pouring down, is ominous, but it's a kind of discomfort that brings me comfort. Calling back to how I felt roaming Silent Hill streets for the very first time. Though not quite as expansive, you'll end up running through a variety of backdrops including the apartments, suburbs, a graveyard, an obligatory sewer, the city, and a subway station. They're all compact but detailed zones that fit nicely into each other. While the main path you need to take makes itself obvious, players looking to unravel the full story can engage in a totally optional quest chain hidden in plain sight. But I'll get to that in a bit. Okay, there's one thing in Hollowbody that didn't work for me. The camera. I've waxed poetic about fixed camera angles before because they're hard to do, but the results are terrific when you get them right. It's clear to me, though, that employing Silent Hill's dynamic camera system is much harder to get right. Hollowbody has a mixture of fixed camera angles and a kind of roving camera that moves with the player in certain scenes. You can't control it, except for a little wiggle here and there, but it will autocorrect depending on the direction you face. This repositioning is squirmy, and if you find yourself at the apex of a scene transition, things get messy. By default, the game uses a push-to-go control scheme, similar to the one Capcom added when they remastered Resident Evil's remake. It also has the same problem when you're moving across fixed screens. You can see here, it's easy to pivot Mika in the wrong direction anytime the screen changes. It helps to swap to tank controls to smooth out these transitions, bringing it a little bit closer to that old Silent Hill feeling, but it does come at the cost of fluid movement. The reason I wanted to highlight it is because there's a workaround. A few months after its launch, Headware added a modern third-person camera mode to the game. It situates the perspective slightly behind Mika's shoulder, just like you'd find in practically every third-person game released after Resident Evil 4. And it's just so much more intuitive. It'll clip through corners here and there, but I prefer that to battling the default camera. Forgive the sacrilege, but I actually recommend you start the game using the modern camera. You don't lose any of the atmosphere, and it actually makes everything from exploration to enemy encounters feel better. It's just a perspective change, so you can't free aim your shots or anything, but I think it vastly improved my time with the game. Whenever I do one of these, I don't know, I guess they're reviews, I usually keep story details to a minimum. But today, I'm going to indulge. Hollowbody has a strong story. More precisely, it has a strong backstory that lends a lot of weight to its horror, and some key details are completely missable. So, here is your spoiler warning. With the exception of the intro, the game unfolds from Mika's perspective. She's a solid protagonist as far as survival horror leads go, brought to life by Kirsten Ria's superb voice work.
She's still out there, Tax. Somewhere. Scared and alone.
The supporting cast is great too, down to even the smaller parts. You find these spots where you can listen to audio echoes of residents right before the fall. They're little vignettes of desperation and dismay that sell the besieged community vibe through naturalistic delivery. It's clear Hollowbody didn't want to pay respects to the wooden line delivery the genre is famous for.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
I wish the game delved a little bit more into Mika's background as a black market shipper, since a legal smuggler is a lot more interesting than the sad dads and beleaguered cops we're used to in survival horror. But I do like how there's a focus on Mika's connection to Sasha, relayed through these short remembrances throughout the story. The way it sounds, Mika's future is one where people are too busy surviving to ever actually live, but Sasha changed that for her. These interstitials remind the player that you're not just here to overcome a situation gone bad, you're looking for someone you care about deeply, even if in the back of your mind you know what you're going to find. And through a staggering amount of bathroom musings, you get to learn that Mika really dislikes bathtubs. I completely agree, you are swimming in your own filth, but it starts to become like Mika is to bathtubs what Heather Mason is to bread. Mika will meet some surly locals on her trek, not all of which require shotgun shell lunch. Periodically, you're antagonized by a mysterious caller. This raspy voice is as cryptic as it is unhelpful, and they're tracking Mika's every step.
Oh dear, you were doing so well. It's a shame you're not cut out for this.
It's important to note, they shouldn't even be able to call you. None of the landlines are connected. It's a subtle hint that you're affected by something the moment you step into town. You also meet a wounded stranger atop the apartment block who appears to be contemplating, how gravity works. He's also got a bad case of the cryptics, but he doesn't appear malicious. Hollowbody is decently linear, so I was actually kind of surprised to see a pivotal choice here. You can either ignore the stranger in favor of your radio contact, and that leads to... or you can convince him to step off the ledge. If you manage that, he'll actually join you as an NPC companion for the rest of the game. You don't have to manage his health, and he won't wield a weapon, but every once in a while he'll stomp on a hollow like a hero. He also adds some color commentary whenever you enter a new area, which Mika actually reacts to. It's a small deviation to the story, but it's kind of nice to have a character for Mika to play off of. It makes the game a touch less lonely. While Hollowbody borrows a lot of its mechanics from Silent Hill, the game's narrative has more in common with OG Resident Evil. The monsters you fight aren't conjured up by a malevolent foggy town. They're victims of corporate malfeasance. You're given a clue as to what's going on while searching the suburb. A note describing a company called Echo Garden. They want to leverage nanotechnology to slow human aging by as much as 90%, but instead it stops aging by 100% since, it fucking kills you. This is the sole reference to Echo Garden on the game's main path. They're important, but you'll hear much more about another company throughout the story, Sherwood State Management. They're a property developer with a grand plan of their own, an underground railway that will connect the British Isles. So, Sherwood moves into Barnston and effectively turns it into a company town. They buy up property and price folks out. Those that do join Sherwood to work on their development project are privy to injury and sickness, but speaking out only landed more people out in the street. This all occurred before a supposed bioterrorist attack struck Barnston, a contagion so out of control that Sherwood was sanctioned to wall up the city with denizens still trapped inside. If you finish the game without straying off the golden path, you only get a tenuous connection between these events. A failed cosmetic project, an aborted railway, and leftover ghouls. But there's an entirely missable side quest of sorts that has you hunt down 3 data disks, each squirreled away in a place that you've already visited. Once you combine them at a special terminal, you're given the whole sordid truth. Turns out, Sherwood is a subsidiary of Echo Garden, and when Echo Garden's experiments went awry, they found themselves with a ton of hazardous nano waste that needed unloading. What better place to dump some waste than a massive construction project they also happened to be footing the bill for? Sherwood was happy to facilitate, but instead of handling the toxins carefully, they chose to dump them quickly, hoping to avoid project delays and questions from onlookers. But haste makes waste, and in this case, haste spilled it. The concoction of organic and synthetic material seeped into the ground and combined itself with the bugs and the earth. It creates, or maybe even wakes up, a hive mind. That's when the virus appears. Airborne and waterborne, the virus infected the residents of Barnsden. It made them see and hear things. They begin referring to an entity called Mother. It made them aggressive, and it hollowed out their bodies. In response, Sherwood fesses up, Echo Garden is dissolved, and a million sanctions are put into place to ensure this never happens again. Is too much of a fiction even for this fiction? No. What happens is that Sherwood goes into defense mode. They try to quarantine the Isles, deploying their own security force in the Barnsden, but they lose control and they know the disease will keep spreading and eventually, the world will know who's to blame. So, they lie, and they tell the world Barnsden was attacked. The walls went up and the bombs came down, bearing the secret that both companies sought to hide, alongside everyone else trapped there. I'm a big fan of Silent Hill's psychological scares. Walking through a bespoke hell tailored for you, against you, and not knowing what will stumble out of the fog next is chilling. But over the years, I've grown to appreciate the externalized threat present in Resident Evil. The cold indifference of profiteers. In the original trilogy, Umbrella is an unfeeling monolith that sees disaster as data and writes suffering off as a byproduct of progress. When things go wrong, it does its damnedest to cover it up, because culpability is more expensive than deniability. Sure, Umbrella is an exaggeration of real-life corporate evils, but if you remove the zombies, liquors, and booby-trapped manners from the picture, it's not that much of an exaggeration. We've seen companies pollute our water and poison our air. Hell, the gentrification and displacement described in the game isn't fiction either. Maybe it's my age, but the plausibility of a company like Sherwood abusing its power to hide an atrocity it caused gets under my skin. Pyramid Head is scary, but capitalism has a higher body count. Mika's journey starts to become a descent as she's impacted by whatever's in the air. The sewers morph into a labyrinth and she starts to see things that can't be real. It's clear Mother is affecting her, beckoning her. Eventually you make your way down the very railway where the infection came from. This is the cavern from the beginning of the game, where Sasha disappeared. Judging by the trail of hazmat-adorned bodies, things didn't go well. You come face to face with whatever the fuck this is. This is the only boss encounter in the game, and it's more of a set-piece fight than a run-and-gun standoff. Not to harp on it again, but the modern camera turns this into a fun chase over the awkward click-sticking that you gotta do to monitor the thing's position. Just a side note. Mika fells the beast and plunges deeper. She can't believe her eyes. She found Sasha. She's hurt, but she's breathing. That's when she receives one last call. Mother. Oddly, Mother offers to help. She says the two of them aren't so different. She reveals herself to be a tremendous tree rooted in the underground. She lets Mika call Tax, her man on the outside. They're finally safe. As you can imagine, that's not exactly true. By the time Tax arrives, Sasha's gone, but Mika's still there, enveloped. Now, if you save the wounded stranger, it's implied Mika actually gets out of this mess. She finds herself in an interrogation room with an unknown suited man who speaks far too deliberately. He wants to hear her story. After all, but the ending I prefer is more ambiguous and more dour. 24 years later, we see a fishing trolley floating outside the waters of Barnsden. In the distance, a hulking figure emerges from the ground. Almost looks like a woman. Maybe all Mother wanted was to escape the underground, having been born in her own prison. Maybe she merged with Mika, needing some sort of catalyst to help her grow free. It's not clear, but what is clear is that the world should worry about wherever this thing goes next. I think Hollowbody fucking cooks. I hope I've been able to convey that. It's got some rough edges, spots where you can see the seams, but nothing that I would say holds it back. The presentation is so strong and the world is so beautifully macabre that I found it easy to forgive any mechanical quirks. There's a glut of retro survival horror games releasing all the time now. Games that are looking to play the same notes Capcom and Konami did back in the memory card era. But Hollowbody succeeds at being more than another refrain from yesteryear. With its tech-noir aesthetic, twisted, nano-ravished husks, and a story that stems from modern anxieties, I think it manages to strike its own melancholic chord.